The year was 1922, a time when America was roaring with change, and in Cincinnati, Ohio, a star was about to be born. Doris Marianne Koff entered the world on April 3rd to German parents who could never have imagined their daughter would become one of Hollywood's most beloved treasures. But life had its own plans for young Doris, and they began with heartbreak. Growing up during the Great Depression, she watched her parents' marriage crumble. A scandalous event in those days that left permanent scars on her tender heart. Yet even in darkness, Doris found her light. At just 12 years old, she showcased the extraordinary determination that would define her life by winning a dance contest. How? By standing on her hands for over 3 hours, a feat that earned her free dance lessons and revealed the fighter within. Fate, however, had a cruel twist waiting. At 14, her dreams of becoming a professional dancer shattered along with her leg in a devastating car accident. Doctors considered amputation. Her dancing career was over before it truly began. But here's where Doris Day's story takes its first, remarkable turn, a moment that would change entertainment history forever. Confined to bed for over a year, unable to move and watching her dreams slip away, she turned to singing. The sweet melodies of Ella Fitzgerald filled her room. And soon, Doris found herself matching those notes with her own voice. What began as a way to pass the endless hours of recovery blossomed into something magical. Her mother, sensing something extraordinary, arranged singing lessons with Grace Rain, who immediately recognized what the world would soon discover. Doris Day possessed a voice that could make time stand still. The girl who thought she'd lost everything had unknowingly found her true calling. From the ashes of one dream, a phoenix was about to rise. Picture this: a 15-year-old girl, still nursing the wounds of a shattered dancing career, steps onto a small stage at a local Chinese restaurant. For $5 a night, Doris sang her heart out, unaware that fate was about to deal her a winning hand. One evening, as her golden voice filled a neighborhood nightclub, bandleader Barney Rapp sat mesmerized. Here was the female vocalist he'd been searching for, but there was just one problem. She was underage. Determined not to let this opportunity slip away, young Doris pretended to be 18, taking her first step into a world that would soon worship at her feet. In 1939, at just 17, Doris adopted the name that would become legendary, Doris Day, inspired by her soul-stirring rendition of Day After Day. Though initially reluctant, the name fit like a glove, and a star was born. But it was 1940 that marked the true beginning of her meteoric rise. Joining Les Brown's band, the 18-year-old overcame paralyzing stage fright to deliver a performance of Embraceable You that left jaws dropped and secured her position as lead vocalist. Yet even as her career soared, personal tragedy struck without mercy. In 1941, while touring with the band, Doris received the kind of news that brings the world crashing down. Her beloved brother Paul had been killed in a car accident. What happened next would become the stuff of legend. Instead of canceling her performance that night, Doris stepped onto the stage, her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, and sang with such raw emotion that the audience was moved to tears. They had no idea of the grief tearing through her, but they felt every ounce of it in her voice. Then came 1945, a pivotal year both for America and for Doris. As soldiers returned home from World War II, her recording of Sentimental Journey became their anthem, their comfort, their welcome home. What few knew was that she recorded this career-defining song while battling a severe cold, giving her voice that distinctive husky quality that made the song irresistible. The record sold over 1 million copies in its first year alone, and just like that, a girl who once dreamed of dancing had instead danced her way into America's heart with nothing but her voice. Behind the dazzling smile that lit up silver screens across America lurked shadows few could imagine. Doris Day, the woman who portrayed wholesome characters in sunlit romances, lived a personal life shrouded in darkness and pain. At just 17, the same age many girls were attending high school proms, Doris found herself trapped in a marriage that would become her private nightmare. Despite her mother's desperate warnings, she wed trombonist Al Jordan, mistaking his possessiveness for devotion. The illusion shattered the day after their wedding when his hand struck her face for the first time. What followed was a descent into hell. Jordan's jealousy festered like an open wound, his accusations of infidelity hurled at her daily, his rage increasingly uncontrollable. The violence reached a horrifying peak during her pregnancy with their son Terry. When Jordan demanded she abort the child and Doris refused, he beat her so severely that she nearly lost the baby she was fighting to protect. But the true horror awaited in her 8th month of pregnancy. Jordan drove her to a remote location, pulled out a gun, and threatened to end both their lives there in the darkness. Through quick thinking and sheer will to survive, Doris escaped, but the trauma never would. Even decades later, long after she had become one of Hollywood's brightest stars, Doris could never sit comfortably in the front seat of a car without being transported back to that terrifying night. She divorced Jordan, but the cycle of heartbreak was only beginning. Her second marriage to musician George Weidler in 1946 crumbled after just 8 months when he confessed he couldn't handle being outshined by his wife's growing fame. Then came Martin Melcher, the man who would inflict wounds deeper than any physical blow. For nearly 2 decades, Doris trusted him completely as both husband and manager. He adopted her son Terry, managed her career, and seemed the steady presence she'd always craved. The truth, when it finally came to light, was devastating beyond measure. After Melcher's sudden death in 1968, Doris discovered he had secretly squandered her entire fortune, the modern equivalent of over $150 million, on failed investments and fraudulent business ventures with his partner Jerome Rosenthal. The betrayal cut deeper still. Melcher had signed her up for the Doris Day show without her knowledge or consent. America's sweetheart, the woman who had earned millions and delighted audiences worldwide, found herself penniless and forced to work on a show she never wanted, simply to pay off the mountain of debt her late husband had left in his wake. The woman who brought joy to millions was privately drowning in heartbreak, betrayal, and financial ruin. The irony was cruel. Doris Day, who played the girl who gets her happy ending in the movies, couldn't seem to find one in real life. The fall came swiftly and without mercy. Imagine waking up one morning as one of Hollywood's wealthiest stars, only to discover by nightfall that you're not just broke. You're millions in debt. This wasn't just some dramatic movie plot. This was Doris Day's devastating reality. When Martin Melcher dropped dead unexpectedly in 1968, he left behind more than a grieving widow. He left a ticking financial time bomb that would explode in Doris's face. For nearly 20 years, she had placed her complete trust in Melcher, handing over her paychecks, signing whatever documents he placed before her, believing he was building their future. The truth was far more sinister. Behind her back, Melcher and his business partner Jerome Rosenthal had been systematically emptying her accounts, funneling her hard-earned millions into questionable investments and outright scams. A fortune worth what would today be over $150 million. Gone. Every penny. Vanished. But the betrayal cut even deeper than money. Without her knowledge or consent, Melcher had signed her to star in The Doris Day Show. A television commitment she never wanted and now couldn't escape. The woman who had once commanded the highest salaries in Hollywood found herself trapped in a golden cage of her late husband's making, forced to perform like a dancing bear simply to keep the creditors at bay. The cruel irony wasn't lost on her. Doris Day, who had portrayed independent, confident women on screen, had been completely powerless in her own life. The legal battle that followed was brutal and prolonged. For years, Doris fought against Rosenthal in court, eventually winning a judgment of $22 million in 1974. Victory in name only. Insurance negotiations whittled that amount down to a fraction of what she was owed. The hard-won settlement couldn't begin to repair the emotional damage inflicted by such profound betrayal. Picture this. A woman approaching 50 who should have been enjoying the fruits of an extraordinary career, instead finds herself starting over, financially and emotionally. Bankrupted by the man who had sworn to love and protect her. The woman who had brought sunshine into America's living rooms through her films was privately living through her darkest storm. And yet, somehow, Doris Day found the strength to keep going. This wasn't just another Hollywood scandal. It was perhaps the most extreme case of financial exploitation of a star in entertainment history. The woman who seemed to have it all had, in reality, been left with nothing but her talent and her resilience. And somehow, against all odds, that would be enough. In the sprawling hills of Carmel Valley, California, A transformation was taking place. The woman who once dominated Hollywood box offices had traded red carpets for rescue missions, designer gowns for denim work clothes, and movie premieres for animal sanctuaries. But to understand Doris Day's extraordinary pivot from entertainment icon to animal welfare warrior, you need to travel back to a heartbreaking moment from her childhood, a trauma that would ultimately reshape her life's purpose. As a young girl, Doris had a beloved dog named Tiny. One terrible day, Tiny was hit by a car before her eyes. The helplessness she felt watching her cherished companions suffer seared itself into her soul. In that moment, though she couldn't have known it, the seeds of a lifelong mission were planted. This wasn't just a childhood pet loss. It was the catalyst for what would become her most meaningful legacy, even at the height of her Hollywood career. When most stars wouldn't dare risk their reputation or shooting schedules, Doris refused to remain silent about animal mistreatment. While filming The Man Who Knew Too Much in Morocco, she witnessed the appalling conditions of animals on set and did something unheard of for a leading lady in the 1950s. She stopped production. Doris flatly refused to continue working until the animals received proper care. In an industry where time literally meant millions of dollars, she stood her ground, forcing powerful studio executives to bend to her will. The animals' welfare came first, period. This wasn't just celebrity activism. This was Doris Day putting her career on the line for creatures who had no voice. By 1978, as her Hollywood star began to fade, another light grew brighter. She founded the Doris Day Pet Foundation, which later expanded into the Doris Day Animal Foundation, DDF. What began as a modest effort to support local animal rescues soon blossomed into a pioneering force in animal welfare. In 1995, when most of her Hollywood contemporaries were writing memoirs or attending retrospectives of their work, Doris launched World Spay Day, a revolutionary campaign that would grow to operate in over 70 countries, preventing the suffering of countless animals through spay and neuter programs. At her Carmel Valley home, Doris created a sanctuary unlike any other. It wasn't unusual to find 30 rescue dogs roaming the property, each one personally saved by Doris herself. These weren't just pets. They were her family, her purpose, her heart. The transformation was complete. The woman once known primarily for her golden voice and magnetic screen presence had become perhaps the most influential animal advocate of her generation. While Hollywood eventually forgot her contributions, millions of animals around the world continue to benefit from her compassion. Doris Day had found her true calling, not in the spotlight, but in the shadows where abused and abandoned animals needed a champion. And champion them she did, with the same determination that had once made her a star. The year 2004 brought a devastating blow to Doris Day's world, one that would trigger a family fracture so profound it would never heal. Terry Melcher, her only child, lost his battle with melanoma at age 62. Beyond the unbearable grief of outliving her son, his death severed a crucial connection in Doris's life, the bridge between her and her only grandson, Ryan Melcher. What happened next would remain hidden from public view for years, a painful secret festering behind the walls of her Carmel Valley estate. Shortly after Terry's funeral, something extraordinary happened. Doris reached out to Ryan with an invitation to dinner. This wasn't just any meal. It represented a potential healing, a chance to rebuild what had been strained since Ryan's parents divorced in 1997. For Ryan, who had grown up admiring his grandmother from a distance, it was the olive branch he'd been waiting for. The chance to reconnect with the woman the world adored but he barely knew. But Ryan would never make it to that dinner. Before he could even set eyes on his grandmother, he was intercepted by Bob Bashara, Doris's business manager. In a private meeting at the Cypress Inn, a boutique hotel Doris co-owned in Carmel, Bashara confronted Ryan with a question that would haunt him for years. "Why do you want to see Doris?" Shocked and confused, Ryan gave the only answer that made sense. "Because she's my grandmother." The response he received was cold and final. He would not be permitted to see her. The blame, according to Bashara, lay with Ryan's parents and past family conflicts. And just like that, the door slammed shut. Not just for a day or a month, but for 14 long years. While Doris Day lived out her final chapter surrounded by her beloved animals and a tight circle of handlers, her only grandson, her only living direct descendant, was kept at arm's length. Security gates were installed around her property. Access to her became increasingly restricted, and the warm, approachable star who had once welcomed fans with open arms became virtually inaccessible. Year after year, birthdays and holidays passed. Attempts at reconciliation met with silence. The world continued to see Doris Day as America's sweetheart, never suspecting the family drama unfolding behind closed doors. And Ryan grew from a young man into middle age, carrying the weight of an unresolved relationship with a grandmother who was, paradoxically, loved by millions, yet a stranger to him. This wasn't just a celebrity family squabble. It was a profound human tragedy playing out in the shadows of fame. A grandmother and grandson, separated not by choice, but by circumstances neither fully understood, running out of time to make things right. In the mystery of Doris Day's final years, one figure emerges as the central character, Bob Bashara, the business manager who became the gatekeeper to one of Hollywood's most beloved icons. His role in the family drama would remain largely hidden until Ryan Melcher finally broke his silence. The scene at the Cypress Inn would become infamous in the saga of Doris Day's later life, a moment when family bonds were severed with surgical precision. Imagine the shock Ryan felt, sitting across from Bashara in that hotel, being interrogated about his motives for wanting to see his own grandmother. Why do you want to see Doris? The question itself revealed volumes about how Doris's world had changed. She was no longer just grandma, but Doris, a valuable asset to be protected, perhaps even from her own flesh and blood. When Ryan explained the simple truth, because she's my grandmother, Bashara delivered the crushing blow. He would not be permitted to see her. The past conflicts between Ryan's parents and Doris were cited as justification, but the real reasons may have run much deeper. Over the next 14 years, as Doris aged from her early 80s into her 90s, her world grew increasingly smaller. The sprawling property in Carmel Valley, once a haven for her animal rescues, began to resemble something more like a fortress. Security gates were installed. Visitor access became tightly controlled. The warm, accessible star who had charmed millions now lived in near isolation, with Bashara firmly controlling who could and couldn't enter her orbit. Ryan's attempts to reconnect met with silence or rejection. Christmas cards, birthday wishes, requests to visit, all seemingly intercepted before they could reach his grandmother's ears. Meanwhile, Bashara's influence over Doris's affairs appeared to grow stronger with each passing year. As she aged and became more dependent on those around her, the wall between her and her grandson solidified. The question that haunted Ryan, and would later trouble Doris's fans, was both simple and devastating. Did she know? Was Doris Day, the woman who had survived abusive relationships and financial betrayal, once again being manipulated by those she trusted? Or had she willingly chosen to cut ties with her grandson, allowing Bashara to act as her shield? The truth remained locked away, as impenetrable as the gates around her property. What makes this story particularly heartbreaking is that it wasn't playing out among strangers, but between a grandmother and her only grandson, her only living, direct descendant and the last remaining connection to her beloved son Terry. While fans continued to send letters expressing their love for Doris Day, her own grandson couldn't get past the gatekeeper who had appointed himself the ultimate authority on who deserved access to America's sweetheart. In Hollywood's long history of tragic endings, this quiet family drama ranks among the most poignant. May 13, 2019, a date that should have brought Ryan Melcher to his grandmother's bedside for tearful goodbyes and final words of love. Instead, he found himself staring at his phone screen in disbelief, learning through a Facebook post that Doris Day, Hollywood legend, animal welfare pioneer, and his own grandmother, had died at the age of 97. In that gut-wrenching moment, 14 years of separation crystallized into permanent loss. There would be no reconciliation, no explanation, no closure. The woman the world mourned as an icon was someone Ryan had been forbidden to see for nearly a decade and a half. The pain of this digital death watch pushed Ryan to break his long silence. In an emotional Facebook post of his own, he pulled back the curtain on the family's secret that had been hidden from Doris's adoring public. To all those who have asked, I received the news of my grandmother's passing like most of you, on social media. I was not permitted to see my grandmother for 14 years. thanks to her manager Bob Bashara, who also handled her estate and controlled access to her life. There is so much more to the story, but it's a heartbreaking truth I have to live with. His words sent shockwaves through the community of Doris Day fans. How could this be? The sunny, warm-hearted woman who had brought joy to millions and fought so passionately for animals had been estranged from her only grandson? The revelation created cognitive dissonance. The Doris Day the public thought they knew seemed incapable of such family coldness. Questions swirled. Was she complicit in the estrangement, or was she herself a victim of manipulation in her vulnerable final years? Bashara quickly countered Ryan's claims, insisting that multiple attempts had been made to reconnect grandmother and grandson, but that Ryan had declined. He pointed to a past statement on Ryan's website where he had once asked people not to contact him about Hollywood or his famous grandmother, but many remained skeptical of this narrative. Those who had witnessed the tightening circle around Doris in her final years, the increasing security measures, the limited access, the carefully controlled public image, wondered if the truth was far more complicated. As obituaries celebrated Doris Day's extraordinary career in philanthropy, they largely glossed over this family tragedy. But for Ryan, the public tributes only deepened his private grief. While strangers shared their memories of his grandmother, he was left with a void. 14 years of conversations never had, holidays never shared, and a relationship that withered not through choice, but through interference. In the end, America's sweetheart died surrounded by her beloved animals and a handful of caregivers, while her only grandson learned of her passing the same way fans on another continent did, through the cold glow of a social media notification. As the dust settled following Doris Day's passing, a war of narratives began. On one side stood Ryan Melcher, the 41-year-old grandson left to process not just grief, but the permanent loss of opportunity. 14 years that could never be reclaimed. On the other side stood those who had surrounded Doris in her final years, particularly Bob Bashara, who painted a very different picture of the family estrangement. The truth, as is often the case, likely lay somewhere in the complicated middle. Doris's longtime publicist Charlie Cullen Walters stepped forward with a counter-narrative, claiming that efforts had indeed been made to reunite grandmother and grandson, particularly around her 90th birthday celebration in 2014. According to Walters, it was Ryan who had chosen to maintain his distance, not the other way around. Attempts were made, Walters insisted, but they were not reciprocated. This version of events cast Ryan not as the excluded grandson, but as the distant relative who had chosen to remain apart from his famous grandmother. Yet those who had observed the increasingly controlled environment around Doris in her later years found this hard to believe. Former staff members and friends spoke off the record about how Bashara had gradually tightened his grip on Doris's world, deciding who could visit, who could call, and what information reached her. A former housekeeper described watching the circle around Doris shrink year by year until only a select few had genuine access to her. She became more isolated, the housekeeper recalled, and it wasn't always clear if that was her choice or others making choices for her. Ryan, for his part, continued to wrestle with haunting questions. Had his grandmother ever wondered why he stopped visiting? Did she believe he had abandoned her? Was she told about his attempts to reconnect? Or were those efforts filtered through the same gatekeepers who had initially blocked his access? The uncertainty was perhaps more painful than any concrete answer could have been. Meanwhile, away from the family drama, Doris had created a different kind of family in her final years. Her days revolved around caring for the animals on her 11-acre ranch, rescue dogs who asked nothing of her except love and care. She had long since left behind the Hollywood that had made her a star, choosing instead a life of quiet purpose. She lived modestly despite her wealth, famously eating off paper plates and keeping a washing machine in her bedroom for convenience. The Doris Day that fans imagined, glamorous and surrounded by admirers, had been replaced by a practical woman who found joy in simplicity and the company of creatures who loved her unconditionally. The contrast between these two narratives, the controlled isolation described by Ryan versus the peaceful retreat portrayed by Doris's inner circle, left fans and biographers with a complex legacy to untangle. Was Doris Day the victim of controlling handlers in her vulnerable final years, or had she simply chosen to retreat from complicated family dynamics in favor of the uncomplicated love of her animal companions? Like the woman herself, The answer contained multitudes. As the sun set on Doris Day's remarkable life, the shadows of family discord couldn't dim the brilliant light of her legacy. At 97, Doris left behind more than just films and records. She left an imprint on American culture so deep that no family controversy could erase it. In her final years, while drama unfolded behind the scenes, Doris continued to live by her own rules, on her own terms. She was perhaps the last of Hollywood's golden age stars who managed to walk away from fame with her dignity intact. The woman who once commanded million-dollar paychecks and topped box office charts chose to live with surprising frugality. Visitors to her Carmel Valley home were often shocked to find her eating off paper plates, keeping a washing machine in her bedroom for convenience, and dismissing the trappings of luxury that her wealth could have provided. This wasn't the behavior of a star clinging to past glories, but of a woman who had discovered what truly mattered to her. Her dedication to animal welfare never wavered. Even into her 90s, she continued to oversee the Doris Day Animal Foundation, making funding decisions and staying involved in advocacy work. The 11-acre property that became her sanctuary wasn't just her home. It was a haven for the countless rescue animals she continued to take in and love. In many ways, these animals became the family that human relationships had failed to provide, loving her unconditionally, demanding nothing in return except care and affection. So fiercely did she guard her privacy, and so completely had she stepped away from Hollywood that she turned down honors most stars would kill for, including the Kennedy Center Honors and the Presidential Medal of Freedom offered by President George W. Bush. Fame, to Doris Day, had become irrelevant compared to her mission of protecting animals. In 2011, at the age of 89, she surprised everyone by releasing a new album, My Heart, featuring previously unreleased songs including several written by her late son Terry. The deeply personal record became a commercial success, making Doris the oldest artist to achieve a top 10 album with new material in the UK. It was a poignant reminder that the talent that first brought her to the world's attention had never dimmed. Her final public appearance came on her 97th birthday in April 2019, just weeks before her death. She posed for a photo with her beloved dogs, thanking supporters for continuing her mission. There was no Hollywood glamour, no makeup team or designer gown, just a woman in simple clothes, surrounded by the animals she loved, still carrying the same warm smile that had captured hearts decades earlier. When she passed away just weeks later, the outpouring of grief transcended generations. Those who knew her only from classic films mourned alongside animal rights activists who knew her primarily for her advocacy. Presidents, prime ministers, and fellow legends paid tribute. The complicated truth of her family relationships became a footnote in a story defined by incredible talent, resilience in the face of personal tragedy, and a second act dedicated to those without voices. In the end, Doris Day's legacy remains untouchable, not because she was perfect, but because she was profoundly, complicatedly human. Behind the sunny smile that earned her the nickname America's Sweetheart, lived a woman who endured abuse, betrayal, financial ruin, and family estrangement, yet somehow managed to transform her pain into purpose. Long after her films have faded, from memory, dogs, cats, and wild animals around the world will continue to benefit from the foundation that bears her name and the revolution in animal welfare she helped to spark. Perhaps that, more than any Oscar or Golden Globe, is the legacy Doris Day would have chosen for herself.